Welcome to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
And I am your other co-host, Josh.
And we have with us the writer and director of the 2021 Red Snow, Sean-Lynch.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Hey man, I'm. This has been an episode that I've been looking forward to since I was able to screen the movie at Genre Blast this past year, and I really enjoyed this film. I thought this film is such a fun time, and we'll get into why I think each of us both respectively had a blast with this movie. But for those that are just tuning in, before we jump into spoilers, this movie hits DVD. You guys can order it now on Amazon. We'll have a link in the description wherever you guys are currently listening to this. It comes out December 28th. But Sean, can you tell us a little bit about what Red Snow is?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. It was really fun to screen at Genre Blast. So it is a vampire horror comedy set at Christmas time, and it basically follows a struggling vampire romance novelist, Olivia, who kind of has aspirations to be like an Anne Rice or something like that. And but she's struggling because she can't get her novel published, and she's spending the holidays alone at her mother's cabin when all of a sudden a bat hits her window, and of course she brings it in to nurse it back to health because she's sympathetic to creatures of the night. And of course the bat turns out to be a vampire. The very next day turns into a vampire named Luke. And this sort of begins this interesting kind of power dynamic between the two of them, because she is interested in his kind. He doesn't really know what to make of her. And the stakes kind of get raised when a vampire hunter, Julius King, arrives on the scene, as well as more vampires who are not quite as friendly as Luke. So yeah, it's that's probably more of a synopsis than you wanted, but yeah, that's Red Snow.
It's all right. It encourages people to buy the DVD, which I'm super stoked to actually add into my collection. This will make its way into my regular rotation of holiday horror.
Love to hear that.
So the one thing I gotta ask: at what point did you start writing and directing the movie and go, "We're gonna put Luke in Grandma's clothing"?
Oh, that was something that just sort of came about very organically while I was writing, even in the first draft, because I was sort of thinking, I like to sort of, especially in early drafts, I like to sort of write myself into corners and then figure out the plot from there. And very early on, I was like, okay, so he would be naked, this vampire. And so what clothes would she have at her mom's cabin? I don't think she would have any men's clothes. The dad has been out of the picture. And so, yeah, and it just seemed like an interesting way to kind of play in that territory a little bit. And I don't know, it just also just when Sarah Alex, the costume designer, and I were just trying on different outfits on the actor, Nico Bellamy, and he tried on that fur coat that he wears early on. It's like, oh man, this is a movie, So a lot of that just sort of came organically in the development process.
Yeah, it was one of those things in the movie that when I was watching, I was like, oh, so this is where we're going with this.
Yeah.
We have an injured vampire locked in a garage in Grandma's coat. Okay. So.
Yeah. I try and take the road less traveled with that sort of stuff.
I don't know. I'd forgotten about that choice when I was rewatching, preparing for this episode, and I purposely waited so my wife could watch this because she loves movies like this. And so that scene where he is revealed in kind of the pink two-piece suit and the fur coat, I was like, I totally forgot about this subplot. And then when he changes for the first time, he's wearing a cardigan and a skirt with a number one mom shirt. And about lost it. I was almost in tears just watching that scene.
And you know what makes it work is Nico pulls off all those outfits. He looks great in the fur coat. He looks great in the pencil skirt. Like, he looks great in all that stuff.
I feel like it's a case of he was just chill in the clothes and like hung out. Like, y'all had lunch breaks, and he walks over to the table in grandma's coat and a skirt, and it's like, yeah, how you doing? So,
Yeah, I mean, it was. We didn't even really think anything of it after the first couple of times he was in that wardrobe.
Look, I can't say anything to his fashion choices, but I can also say that my wife purposely all the time just is like, if she can wear a dress, she says that dresses are so much better to wear than pants. And so you just kind of feel like you're wearing nothing at all. So I mean, it's comfortable. So I mean, go for it, dude.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going anywhere. He doesn't have to impress anybody.
I mean, he's injured. He can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
he has no pride at that point.
So I want to kind of like get away from I guess like the dress choices of this movie and kind of head into the setting. So this is a Christmas movie, but it's so much more than that, because this movie is able to really blend a multitude of genres. Whether, yes, it has that horror aesthetic to it, but it plays a lot in the comedy aspect. And then even as you're going through the synopsis, there's also that will they, won't they kind of dynamic between the two protagonist characters. And so you kind of have that like little bit of like romance in there, but then at the same time, like, you also have those like elements of like parody where it's kind of like deconstructing a lot of what we've seen as mainstream vampires. And from someone that doesn't really like vampire movies, I found this one so refreshing. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about the challenges of blending all of these genres together.
Oh man, I'm surprised you don't like vampire movies, Josh. Didn't you guys just do Night Watch? I was looking at some of your, although I don't know where you guys landed on that. I need to look for that episode.
I like Night Watch and Day Watch. He thought it was like a crack dream or something.
Okay.
Fever dream.
Okay.
Fever dream. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming from a perspective of loving vampires. I mean, I've been a vampire fan since a very young age. I think I saw the Bela Lugosi Dracula when I was like 5. Like, I've been weaned on this stuff. So, yeah, that lore and like the Van Helsing type character and the rules and all of that stuff. That's been ingrained in me from a very young age, and things like The Lost Boys and Fright Night and then just, I don't know, I think the tone and the different genres just come from like having kind of eclectic taste in shit. Like, I just like a lot of different stuff. And so at times, like, maybe this movie feels like a hat wearing a hat, because it is a lot of things. Like, as I love Christmas horror, I love, I even have like a soft spot for a lot of rom-coms and that sort of thing. And so these are like conventions that I like kind of playing with and seeing if it can still like hold up as a horror movie. Like, if I think that the key to that, I've said this before, is I think making sure that the humor comes from the characters, but still treating the vampires as like a threat. Like, the vampires themselves, I try to at least the antagonistic vampires, Jackie and Brock, played them like fairly menacing, so they're not too goofy. But yeah, it was definitely like a tricky balancing act throughout.
So one of the things that got me with the rules is they mentioned the rules, and you used to hear that a lot in early vampire works, talking about the different rules of vampires and things like that. But then you had something like Interview with the Vampire, where Anne Rice, I believe it had Louis making the statement that a lot of that was just the writings of a drunken Irishman.
I love
in
that
reference
line.
in reference to Bram Stoker.
Yeah, totally.
And then you had, crap like the sparkly vampire movies that I've never actually watched.
Twilight.
Yeah, I refuse to watch those movies, but they didn't follow the rules of what's supposed to be vampires and what they can and can't do. So why did you decide to go with the vampire rules in this one, which hadn't really been kind of touched on in quite a while in movies?
Oh man, well I kind of beg to differ. I think every vampire movie, even if they don't state it explicitly, has their own take on the mythology. Like Midnight Mass just came out. I loved it. Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass. I mean, that's not exactly a vampire thing entirely, but it's definitely, they build a very certain mythology, and like these are the kind of rules that we're in. And I feel like they don't always have a speech about it. I mean, in John Carpenter's Vampires, they definitely have a speech like that. In Blade, they definitely have a speech like that. And they're usually very down on garlic and crosses and all of those and they don't turn into bats and this kind of like shoving aside all the antiquated stuff. And it's like, I want to bring that stuff in. Like I like it when all that stuff kind of works because it's all, and I kind of like just like bending it to your own purposes. And some of that was kind of just reverse engineered for the kind of like set pieces I wanted. Like we're shooting out in the snow. I want to do like daylight shit. Like I want action sequences out in the snow during the day. And so that's why, the sun doesn't burn them. Like it's just because I wanted like daytime exteriors in this movie ultimately. And so I think that, when you make a vampire thing, you're allowed to establish what the rules are. These vampires don't sparkle in the sun. Like it hurts them. Luke describes it as getting kicked in the balls over and over again. It's like painful. But they can tolerate it. They don't explode the way they do in most vampire things, I think.
Also, when you're talking about the rules, I thought it was very interesting, the twist on holy water. It depends on the priest who blesses it. I won't spoil it for the people that haven't seen this movie yet, but I just absolutely love that because it feels very timely, but also at the same time like it's kind of, being very real with things. It's like, maybe not all priests are as good as we claim they be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just surprised it has not come up before. I mean, it's like, especially now that we know, particularly about the Catholic Church and the various abuse scandals that have come to light. It's like, why would we rubber stamp holy water? Like every priest has the same moral authority. I'm sure like that's what not to get into a whole other thing, but I feel like that's sort of worth investigating. Like, some of those dudes, I don't think that they're qualified to bless water. I think I am more qualified to bless that water. So I don't know. To me, it was just like an obvious thing to do. And I was, again, like, it's kind of like the whole idea of a vampire Christmas movie. I wanted to do it because I don't think that one exists, at least not one that I was aware of. I mean, of course, there's like 30 Days of Night, which is like a snow-based vampire movie.
Yeah.
But I kind of was just trying to pick things that I've always thought about and I've always wanted to kind of see represented on screen, but had just not seen for whatever reason.
And now some things that can't be unseen. So
yes.
So can you talk about shooting, the challenges of shooting in winter?
Yeah, I mean, so we shot this on location in Lake Tahoe, pretty much right before the lockdown. Like we were, so luckily that's not something we had to worry about. We didn't know what COVID was. We shot this in early 2020. And I think the big thing was just, especially on these night shoots out in the cold, just conversations with the crew. It was a pretty small crew, and just like letting them all know, like, hey, we're going to be out there in the shit. Like, we need to layer up. We need to find ways to, facilitate like bringing hot drinks and soup out to people, especially for some of these night shoots. And also just like being very prepared. My cinematographer, Gavin Murray, and we shot listed the entire movie in pre-production, which is something I tell like every low budget movie to do. Like just have the shots you absolutely need to make the scene work. And then you can have your little wish list of the nice to haves, because once you're on set and you're burning daylight and you're burning through the money and burning through the days, like you need to already have all that figured out. Like you can't really be flying by the seat of your pants unless you really have to. And so I think that was just it, because, when you're working in the cold, there's just so many things that can go wrong, and just like making sure that you've covered all that you can, because there will be surprises. I mean, we like brought extra batteries because those run out faster in the cold. Just thinking through like the wardrobe that the actors are going to be wearing, and having like big coats ready to throw on, Laura, since she's dressed pretty skimpily throughout the movie, like between takes, just like keeping people warm, keeping people safe. It's just like a whole other thing to worry about is when you're in extreme temperatures, on top of just the creative side of it. But I think we handled it pretty well, considering how small the crew was and how fast we were working.
So working in the snow like that, I'm guessing, I mean, I've never shot a movie, but is that something where part of taking things into account is like the length of sessions of taping? That way you don't accidentally like freeze an actor half to death?
Yeah, I mean, we had shout out to my producer Ulrich Bursell. He had this whole thing set up where we had like a pop-up tent with like sides on it and a propane heater going inside of it. So there was like this little like warm green room. Yeah. Like that propane heater was just like, that deserves a credit in the movie, because people like between takes, like we could just rush them over there. Like it never got like freezing. I mean, we were still in California, so like cold is a relative term. It was in the 30s probably. It was as cold as it got. Like I was interviewed the other day by someone from Iowa, and they were like, the 30s, that's not cold. Like, so it was cold to us, like we're wimps in California. But it was cold enough that we definitely, you work slower in the cold. Like you start to get, literally like brain freezes. Like I had to keep referring to my little like notes and things, because it's like 3 a.m. It's cold. Like we're, it's easy to lose track of like what's going on. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of just physical and mental challenges that come with working in the freezing cold. Luckily, there weren't like a lot of night shoots in the cold. Like a lot of it is inside the cabin, and that stuff, I mean, it was still fairly cold, but like it's much more manageable in interiors. But yeah, it's I wouldn't recommend it. Like it wasn't always fun, but it's manageable as long as you're prepared, and as long as you prepare people and let them know what they're in for, and tell them to layer up, and give them options to stay warm.
It's one of those things. You see these movies that tape in cold environments like that, like you mentioned, 30 Days a Night earlier, or The Thing, and you just, if you're not in the industry, it's one of those things you kind of wonder about, how do they kind of account for that kind of environment.
Yeah, and I think people were generally pretty happy on the set. I mean, this wasn't The Revenant, like people weren't miserable. It helped that we were all friends. It helped we all knew each other. But for the most part, everybody knew each other going in, and and we just we made safety the priority, and I was not about to like make people do insane hours like wearing nothing, and like I didn't like I didn't like have a Colonel Kurtz moment where I was just losing my mind out in the snow. Like it was very much like let's keep it safe. Let's do this in a smart way.
What were some of the challenges when you guys were like location scouting? Because I would imagine that like there had to have been some difficulties looking, because part of what makes this film so great is the isolation factor with it. It really helps intensify the climax of this movie and the third act perpetually as well. So when it came to like location scouting, what were some of the difficulties you guys had?
We shot in South Lake Tahoe, which I don't know how well you know that area, but The South Lake is a little more rugged. It's a little more rural, like it's more wooded, which is kind of perfect for the movie. And whereas the North Shore is a little more touristy, it's a little more, a little wealthier. And so it kind of worked to our advantage shooting in South Lake because there's just these wide expanses of woods where, like, we went through the Tahoe Film Commission and all of that, but at a certain point we were just knocking on doors telling people, hey, we're going to shoot in the woods, is that okay? And they either wouldn't be there because these were like holiday homes that most of the houses in the area were vacant when we were shooting, which is great. Most of the time they're like, yeah, sure, like, I don't give a fuck. Like, and it's just kind of that attitude there. This cabin is in the family. It has been in the family for generations. Olivia's cabin, and so and kind of the surrounding woods around there is where we shot a lot of the exteriors. Like, we were never that far from our base camp. Even, that's just kind of movie magic. Like, even when it seems like we're way out there, we're really not far from Olivia's cabin at any point, really. Like, we did some location shooting, like for the butcher shop scene and for the scene where she's like, further away from the cabin for that stuff. But generally it was like, we never were too far away. Like, if there was, anything that went wrong or if we needed to grab more gear, like we could, just hoof it back basically.
So with the location, finding houses, because the house is like pretty much the major location in the surrounding woods. And you see other movies and shows like pretty much everybody at this point has seen Cobra Kai, and you've seen LaRusso's house. I know they've actually had to change the story because the owners of the house have sold it. So, and they've had to change the story because of it. How do you go about finding like the cabin in general? Did you just kind of like stroll down the street? So that one looks sweet. Let's see if we can get that one. Or is it somebody that you knew? Or
no, that's actually my family's cabin. That was my grandpa's cabin, and it was passed down through the generations. And I mean, I share it with like a whole mess of cousins and family. But it's the thing where you email the powers that be in the family and say, hey, I want to use the cabin for such and such dates. Only this time it's like, instead of I want to spend 4th of July there, it's like I want to make a vampire movie there. And I think they're pretty understanding about that. I mean, at that cabin, I've like shot my first little short films when I was 6 years old at that cabin. I think it was like an alien movie, and I was chasing around my cousins with like an alien mask that I had made out of a paper grocery bag. So that, a lot of history in that cabin. And what's funny is like, it wasn't exactly what I always kind of figured, like, I built the story around the cabin that I had access to, which is kind of what just good advice for any low budget filmmaker is, like, think about the resources you already have. Like, it's not your typical cabin in the sense that it's, and this kind of worked to the advantage of the movie. Like, it's fairly large. Like, there's a whole lot of the rooms that just we don't show in the movie. Yeah. Like, we kind of had to use movie geography a little bit to like hide just how big it is. But how that worked for us though is that we were able to use it for our green rooms and for our production office and like all this, especially on the second floor. They're like, in the movie, it sort of seems like the only thing upstairs is Olivia's room. But there's like, that's where our like whole base was. So it really served a lot of purposes. And like a bunch of the crew, including myself, just slept there. Like, it was a hot set, but we were just living there for the shoot, So yeah. So that was a case of just, luckily I already had a cabin that I was able to use. And, that's even why it's set in Tahoe, is because, it's all reverse engineered from stuff I had access to.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
So I'm going to put the official spoiler warning on this now. I feel like we've talked about it. We've gotten into this movie enough. Let's jump into spoilers. And honestly, I want to talk about Olivia's character first because she's quite an interesting journey throughout the course of this. As you were talking about, the synopsis is that she is basically this struggling author who's trying to get her first book published and get it out there, and also at the same time she is grieving and kind of going through the loss of her mother and kind of the transitional period of like estate sales and like wills and kind of where that comes in. And I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about getting into that headspace, because that's a very particular thing I feel like this movie does really well, is because grief is a really hard topic to address, but it never feels heavy-handed in this. But you can kind of also at the same time see that she's grieving in her own way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm lucky in the sense that my parents are still with me, but I've definitely lost close family over the years, and it's something that I thought a lot about while making this project. And for me, it was important that she had the right amount of distance from that grief. Like, we get the sense that I think in dialogue we even address it, but the idea is always that she was about a year removed from her mother's death. So it was enough time that she hadn't moved on entirely, but the rest of her family seems to have. Like, we hear from her sister, and she's completely moved on and is like already kind of, almost kind of like trying to like push her out, to pursue conventional things, like get a quote real job outside of the arts and like start a family and all of this stuff. And I don't know, I think that right away it's kind of a shorthand without a lot of exposition to kind of get you on the character's side and to kind of understand that she's very much on her back heel. She's living in her mother's house. She's around all of her mom's possessions. Like, she very much is carrying this grief when we meet her in the story. And yet at the same time, by getting a little distance from it so that it's not too fresh, we're allowed to keep the story fairly light and allow her to still be a comedic character. I thought that was an important detail to add to her. And as someone else pointed out to me, like, it's the only way to explain how someone from our generation could own that house is that she inherited it, which is very sad, but very true.
That kind of hurts, but it's so true.
Her being a writer and the way you showed the sister kind of pushing her and telling her to get a job, why don't you get a real job, and how well is the writing working out for you, things like that. that's not an uncommon thing I've heard from people who have chosen to go into some sort of art form. Um, what brought that about as the basis for Olivia? That you wanted her to be a writer? Was it that you were planning on the plot going kind of the way it was going? Or was it you started writing as like, huh, what if she's a writer? How did that come about in the story?
I always knew that I wanted her to be a writer. I mean, writing can be such a lonely thing because you do it by yourself. I think about things like Misery, which shares a lot of the same DNA with this film, and it attracts a very certain type of personality. Like almost, I mean, I speak from experience. Like it's sort of an obsessive personality because you need to do it constantly to get good at it, and without any guarantee that anyone will read it or like it. It can be a very isolating thing. I mean, a lot of creative fields are that way, but I feel that way about writing in particular. And it just seemed like such a natural fit for her. And even before I decided that it was about that vampires would be the focus, I remember the very early spark of the idea. It was, what if a writer of, I think my earliest ideas were like, what if a writer of like mysteries gets involved in our mystery? But then as like I thought more about it and thought how fun it would be to bring vampires into this, like then it became like, oh, I know what like a writer of supernatural romance is like, like that's a very specific personality that I felt would be interesting to explore.
No, I absolutely love that, and I think that you talk about the fact of how isolating art can be sometimes. I remember back in 2016, when I started doing Victims, it kind of was this thing is like, is anyone actually listening? And even now being in, now we're up to doing 4 podcasts a month, and, now that mission is validated, but I feel like even doing something like that, and even in someone in your position, if I make this movie, is someone actually going to watch it? Are people going to enjoy it? And one of the things that we see Olivia go through early on is actually she gets like rejection letter from a publisher, and then the next sequence is actually her going into a room where she's got an entire drawer of rejection letters. And that rejection really takes its toll on your mental health. And I think that combined with the grief of her mother, we see a conversation between her and her sister. And you can kind of see that she's not really wanting to kind of admit her defeat. And then I think Luke changes a lot of that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, this isn't exactly like an autobiographical movie because it's about vampires, and I do not fight vampires in my free time. But yeah, I think that being in the arts can be isolating and it can be discouraging because I think about my previous feature, Prep School. I'm very fortunate in the sense that Red Snow has played a lot of great festivals. You mentioned Genre Blast, and it's been accepted to a lot of places. It's been rejected from a lot of places. But my first feature was universally rejected. It just barely got distribution, and it kind of got dumped onto VOD, and nobody's seen it, and that's fine. I'm over it. But it is that sort of thing. Like, at what point do you just kind of like? There's always this voice in your head that's sort of like, do you give up on this? Like, if you don't do this, like, what are you? Like, for me, I'm very much defined by the wanting to make stuff, like wanting to create stuff, like write stuff. It's sort of this obsessive thing, and and I think that you talk about rejection. Like, I think that it's easy to let other people kind of define your worth in a lot of ways, and I think that that's kind of what Olivia is dealing with when we meet her. Like, we cede so much of our like self-worth to these people that we don't even know. Like, we don't really know what these like programmers at festivals are like. We don't know what their own experience is. Like, there's so much kind of context that we don't know about, and yet we assign so much value to that. And I think that's a major thing that Olivia is dealing with, and I think it's just a major thing that we deal with in the arts is this kind of cycle of the highs of of validation when someone likes your stuff, and then the lows of rejection. It can be really tough.
Yeah, you have to be vulnerable enough to really put yourself out there. It's part of the creative process because, if you love, the old saying goes, if you love something, you have to let it go. And that's part of publishing your art into the world.
Oh yeah, totally. It becomes the world's once you let it out there to do with what the world will.
One of the things with Olivia is you see her dealing with kind of the remnants of her mom passing and dealing with all that stuff, dealing with her family, dealing with her rejection. Then you see her kind of perking up, dealing with Luke. And in a way, he almost seems to give her the approval and almost strength to do what she wants to do. And you have the turn with the other two vampires showing up and everything going wrong to find at the end of the movie she's almost been empowered and become her own strong individual. Would you credit that to dealing with Luke, to dealing with the whole situation, to overall dealing with it all and just kind of coming to terms with who she can be and the success she's capable of?
Yeah, Olivia's sort of character arc was Denise Cisneros plays the character, and she does a great job. And this is something that I talked to Denise a lot about as we were sort of figuring out the character. I think that she kind of goes through this whole careful what you wish for journey a little bit because she dreams of meeting a real life vampire, and she does. And he seems helpful, but there's always kind of the risk that he's just manipulating her, and that's kind of like the central tension of the movie. And she even asks him the question at the end of the movie, like, was any of it real? And that's kind of left to the viewer to decide. And I think that she does find strength from, she's only written about this stuff, and now she's in a vampire story, and she's pulling through. And I think that especially when she's kicked out of her own home and pursued by vampires and kind of just left to deal with it, I think that that's when she does find that inner strength, and I think that's totally like part of her journey is figuring out like, no, I have to rely on myself for this, and I just love the way that Denise plays it in the movie, because it's very cathartic to see her march back to her house and take on those vampires.
Yeah, I agree. Like the first time I saw this, I was really surprised by the ending with the garage scene between her and Luke. The Sevron group weaving into there at the end, which I want to talk about because I have conspiracy theories. But I will save those for just a few minutes, and I'll get this out. You kind of see her really come full circle where she's kind of going through this grief and rejection phase of being this struggling author in the beginning, and kind of like also being distant from family, not having the approval from family. But then you get into this entire like crazy movie of vampires are real and unicorns are real and vampire hunters are real. Candy fairies are not real. It's such a strange thing to life. Candy elves.
Candy elves.
But with the thing that, then you get to the end and it's, now Lucas is basically her prisoner. Was that always intended to kind of, be the ending, or, why did you guys decide to kind of show her strength as a character in that particular way?
I think for me, that's sort of subverting expectations a little bit, because I'm so frustrated by the power dynamics and a lot of these like supernatural romance things where often it's just like, the protagonist just has no power in the relationship whatsoever, even when the like vampire or werewolf or mummy or whatever is just extremely emotionally abusive and manipulative. And, you know, it's like Luke is an asshole. You know, like that's kind of my take on the movie. And, you know, I know that audiences sort of run the gamut with this movie. People who come to I mean, Luke, you know, you can empathize with him, but at the end of the day, he is a killer, you know, and he's going to kill humans as long as he's alive, you know. So you basically have to drive a stake in his heart, or you have to capture him, or he's just going to continue killing. Like, he can't change. It's just in his nature. It's not because he's evil or anything. It just, that's what he is. You know, he's a bloodsucker. And so for me, like, that's kind of the only way you can end the movie. I think it's a little too cut and dry to just put a stake in his heart. I think that in a way, because he's manipulated Olivia so much, it's almost like he deserves worse than that. But it was enough that when I got feedback on the first cut of the movie, which normally I like to do, you know, at a theater with lots of people there, and we have sort of a discussion. This post was firmly during COVID, so I had to like send out links to people and do it that way. I think it was like an anonymous Google survey. But what I kept getting was like, oh, why did she shoot Luke? Like, Luke saved her. And it's like, I think you're missing the point. Like, 10 minutes ago, he was ripping someone's head off, like an innocent person's head off. Like, do you not remember that? So that's why in the final cut, right before she shoots him, and also there's like a disconnect on people understanding her line about like, is that the sweater I gave you? Because a lot of people were like, oh, like what? She shoots him because he threw the sweater on the ground. It's like, no, there's blood on the sweater, people. Come on. So that's why in the final cut, there's like actual like flashes, like kind of like the James Wan style. Here's a flashback from like 3 scenes ago to remind you the importance of this. So yeah, the audience identifying with Luke is something that I wasn't planning on. I think that's just a credit to Nico Bellamy being so good in this role that people did like strongly sympathize with him. But at the end of the day, he's a bastard. You know, he's a killer. And I thought just the most interesting way to flip this power dynamic once and for all is if he's, you know, like, again, spoiler for the end of the movie, but if he's just kind of imprisoned and having to give her notes forever. Like, I think that that's kind of a punishment fits the crime sort of thing. Now, I think you were sort of hinting at is, yes, it also leaves it open if I wanted to revisit these characters someday, which currently I don't plan to. But, you know, that's another just added benefit of not killing off Luke at the end.
I kind of took it more as she gained control over what she wasn't able to control.
And that's a totally valid read, too. I totally think so.
So... all right, this is where my conspiracy theory comes in.
Okay.
I'm going to pull from another franchise in John Wick. You know, people, when they first saw John Wick, they're like, oh, there's this hotel, the Continental. There's so much more story to tell that we can do away from John Wick. And now, almost 10 years later, we're getting a Continental series. So, the Sevron Group, I feel like has such a rich history that is not explored in this, and it was kind of like one of my saddest things about this movie is that I was like, I want to know so much more about the Sevron Group. Is there ever like, I don't know if I'm like fishing for like cool exclusive as a journalist, but like, are there any plans to like perhaps like, you know, bring this into like another medium or like another like short film kind of exploring this organization?
Well, let me tell you, I have tons of backstory on the Sevron Group that did not make it in. So it's like, currently, like I said, I don't really have any plans. It would have to be the sort of thing where, you know, like someone would have to fund this. I don't think I could like crowdfund a Sevron Group movie like I did this. But yeah, you know, I'm totally interested in that world. Like, I want to see more of Simon. He was a fun character. Like, we see very little of Simon. He's just in the third act of the movie. But, you know, like, part of the reason I wanted to cast like a great actor, Eddie Ewell plays Simon. Part of the reason I wanted to cast a real actor in that role and not just a buddy was like, you know, if you know, it's all about like leaving some options for me later down the road. Like, I would love to do more Sevron Group stuff. Like, I love this shit. And yes, there's a lot to explore there. And you know, you mentioned John Wick. I think that that's a great example of world building the right way, where you're not given a ton of exposition about something. It just kind of name dropped, like, this is a thing, like you don't need to know the history of it in this first movie. But if there was a Severon Group movie or a sequel to this, that would inevitably be explored in more detail, and I'd be happy to do it.
The Severon Group kind of came across to me as almost like a more aggressive, what were they called? The Telemusca, I believe. I read a lot of the Interview with the Vampire stuff. That basically they tracked the history of vampires and stepped in and stuff every now and again. And that's kind of what it reminded me of, with a touch of Illuminati goodness.
Oh yeah, and the Freemasons too was definitely with the Eye of Providence as their logo. No, you touched on pretty much everything. Maybe a dash of the Rotary Club.
Guys, so now I'm curious. Is there like a cut of this movie that actually has more with the Severon Group? Because you talked about like editing it after test screenings and stuff like that. So I'm kind of curious if there's like deleted scenes that like with the Severon Group.
Most of the stuff, I mean, I write a lot of backstory that I intentionally never include. It's just kind of it's to help me direct, and kind of like, and also just conversations I have with the cast and stuff. But I think the only thing that got tightened a little bit is when she's on the phone with Simon. And Eddie's great in that scene, and Denise is great in the scene. But what I found was when she's on the phone with him, like, it kind of drags the pace of the movie. We want to get back to the house. We want to fight the vampires. We can't have like that scene go on too long. And I think there was some stuff with Simon where they got a little bit more into. It's not a lot though. Very little was revealed very intentionally of what this group actually is. And I think also importantly, there's two very different visions of what it is presented in the movie. There's Luke's idea. He's kind of unreliable because he's a vampire, in that they're fascists and they just want to kill everything that is not human. Later we find out some of that seems not to be true. But, also the Julius King is not such a great guy. Vernon-Wells' character is not this upstanding person. So, it's kind of they're kind of a gray area intentionally in the movie, and we're really not sure what to think of them.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
I mean, I want more of them. I loved it. I also like, and I just want to, the brief aside, like that scene you're talking about with between Denise and Eddie when they're talking about needing vampire hunters, and they have that brief conversation about Julius King, who's Vernon-Wells' character in this movie. I guess I caught it. I missed it on the first time around, but the second time around, like when he pulls the picture frame of it, and he's like, "No one's like Julius," and it's like, it's not quite a photograph, but it's like this like drawing. It looks like. Can you explain that?
I don't know. It's funny is like, there's always parts that seeing this movie with a live audience, there's always jokes that land and ones that don't. And for me, him pulling out the like photograph was always supposed to be a laugh line. It's like, well, this is weird. Why does he have a framed photo of this guy on his desk, or this framed like? I think it's actually a charcoal rendering that I commissioned because I thought it was funnier. It was just literally just kind of a throwaway gag, but for whatever reason, whenever that happens, I think people are just kind of baffled by it. Like it's always just kind of silent when he takes out that photograph. And there's usually a laugh when he brings up the fact that he always used to bring me something from his travels. Like that's where the Tahoe sweater comes from, is like it was like a souvenir that Julius bought to give to Simon. Like, you know, almost like dad's back from his trip. Here's a snow globe sort of thing. And so, yeah, I mean, honestly, it's kind of just there as a gag, but I think it was also to underscore in this world, like amongst the Severon group, amongst the vampires, it's kind of establishing like Julius King was the best at this. And he's gone. Like, so now that he's gone, like there's really no one else to help with the situation. And it's kind of hinted he's a little bit over the hill, like probably past his prime vampire hunting days, and that's why he got a little sloppy and why he got killed. But yeah, I commissioned that was a set photo that I actually took of Vernon-Wells on set, and then I literally just found someone on Fiverr to do a charcoal version because I thought it would be weirder and more memorable. I wish I had a backstory in world for that, why he has that, but it was just to be weird.
No, like the fact that you have a story that's like, it's just to be weird. Like I forgot about that in seeing it on Genre Blast, and then my wife and I were watching it the other night, and I just busted out laughing. I was like, there's a weird dynamic the two of these guys have, but God,
yeah.
It's so good.
It's unclear what their relationship is. Like, you could read it as, like, you know, they're involved somehow. You could view it as, like, more of a father-son thing. It's open to interpretation. There's no wrong interpretation.
Well, there's definitely enough in the movie side story-wise that's hinted at and not talked about. You definitely could go on to do, like, another movie with Luke and Olivia to see where they go from here. You could do a side story with vampire hunter dude that you just say his name and I just forgot it already because I'm the oldest one.
Julius King.
Yes,
yeah.
God. Alzheimer's is kicking in, damn it.
You don't have your Red Snow wiki open with all of the conspiracy theories about the Severon group and
that's in another
the Wikipedia of Red Snow.
That's in another window, so he takes all the notes. I just kind of go along with everything. So he's got all the conspiracy theories. But yeah, the way the story's wrote, you really could do like a continuation to see where they go. You could do a side movie to see what Luke had done up to that point with his buddies. You could do something with Julius. You could do something with Severin Group. It left you with a lot of openings because of the way the story played out overall.
Yeah. Oops. Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah.
That's so great, and I'm curious right now because like, I wonder if you can kind of like to talk about this to go back to the mental health a little bit, and you know if you don't want to get vulnerable with it yourself, like. I can edit all this out, but my question is like I have IMDb pulled up while you were talking earlier about like the submission process, and you talked about the reaction to Red Snow versus your first film, Prep School. And many people may or may not know this, but there's a 6-year gap in between the two of these projects, and I'm wondering if the kind of the creative process and the toll, and kind of also like just hearing the no after so long and kind of being rejected, did that have anything to kind of play on like the time between these two projects?
I think the will to make another movie was there. I think it's just it's an even longer gap because Prep School to give you a peek behind the curtain there, we shot that in 2012, and it did not get accepted to a festival until 2015. Whereas Red Snow was like instant, like it was the rough cut got accepted, and I think that it's part of it is just like, it's a better movie, but I think that. I always sort of assumed like, oh, you make your micro budget film that does well, and you kind of graduate to so you'll just, your next one is there for you, But in that interim, I was just trying to get something made. I mean, not even necessarily Red Snow. Like there were all kinds of different scripts I was trying to get made, and and it was kind of this cycle of either rejection or working with producers who said they could do a lot for you, but ultimately could not, for whatever reason. And, it's a very, it's a very tough process, and it takes years and years to get something off the ground. And honestly, I kind of credit Red Snow to that big gap that you're talking about, because, in that interim, I met my girlfriend, now wife, and we made a short film together, which sort of like reinvigorated my love for making things. And, I started to think less about, oh, why am I not getting the budget that I want to make this? And it's just kind of like, well, I don't really need that. I can crowdfund something like smaller that I can do now. And that was kind of like empowering to think about, just kind of getting back to the basics, getting back with my friends from film school. And that was kind of the genesis of this whole project. Was I was just kind of sick of waiting around for the next thing to take off. Like I had already spent many years on that, and it only made me frustrated and bitter. So this was just like it was a very difficult project to pull off, but it was, it was joyous in that sense, because it was kind of like getting back on the horse after not being on it for so long. So, it's been night and day from my experience on my first film.
Well, from what I understand, it's not unusual for some films to take a few years to actually get put out, or go through the whole development process. House of a Thousand Corpses from Zombie took a few years, and he finally just backed it himself, was my understanding. He got rejected by all the major companies and then finally put it out himself. So from my understanding, that's not unusual at all to run into that situation. So it's interesting to hear how you went about getting it done in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had some Rob Zombie money to sell.
I think we all do.
Yeah, but we're sort of more on a wing and a prayer on this, but I'm glad it turned out well.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun movie overall. It was, it had its fun moments, its comedy parts, and kind of some eye rolling with a little bit of cheese here and there. But it's overall a fun movie.
Yeah, I absolutely, like I said at the beginning of the show, like I think this film is just such an absolute blast. Like Mark was saying, like it's able to not only embrace the Christmas season without feeling too heavy on the Yuletide, so you have it, but it's also like it balances those like vampire tropes really well, and also embraces its like more comedic roots, and it kind of like flirts with romance, but it never quite like lands at romance. And it's just these genres are blended together very efficiently, and I think that is the reason why, having seen it twice now, like it's the reason why I was so exciting to jump back into it for a second viewing.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned it at the top of the show, but it's coming out in the U.S. on December 28th on DVD and VOD. And it's already available in a lot of other countries, in Europe especially, UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, a lot of places out there. And yeah, it's if you like you said, it doesn't have to be treated as a Christmas movie. For some reason, it's coming out after Christmas in the U.S. and Canada, but But yeah, if you're into vampire movies, if you're into horror comedies, if you're into kind of campier, weirder shit, I think that Red Snow is the stocking stuffer for you.
And as I previously mentioned, we will provide a link in the description below where you guys can snag your own copy. I know that I'll be snagging my own copy and rewatching it every year for Christmas, alongside Black Christmas, Krampus, and Fat Man. But
Santa's Sleigh, I'd like to throw that one in there with Bill Goldberg.
I mean, I'm always a fan of Die Hard for Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Same.
People that'll fight me on that one.
If it's set at Christmas, it's a Christmas movie. End of story.
I feel like we just opened up another can of worms. So before that podcast comes out, where can people find more information online about Red Snow?
Yeah, man, go to redsnowmovie.com. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on all that shit. But yeah, Red Snow Movie, we're going to update that with all the purchase links and stuff as we get closer. And yeah, like you mentioned, it's on Amazon. A lot of independent retailers are going to carry it. I think Target's going to carry it, so it'll be out there.
Nice. All right. Well, Mark, where can people find you online?
I'm just a nerd that paints miniatures and hangs out with you doing stuff like this. But I'm on Instagram. Titanium Juggernaut Painting on Instagram.
All right, and you guys can find me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, and you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube, wherever you guys get your podcasts from. If you go to victimsandvillains.net, not only can you guys get links to more podcasts like this, movie reviews, our mental health resource library, and all of our social links, all of which are going to be in the descriptions. And if you are like Sean and you have a film, you're an independent filmmaker, consider submitting your film to our first ever film festival being held April 29th and 30th at the Alamo Draft House. Details are going to be in the descriptions below. So until next time, remember that the longer that you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back. Have a good night, guys.